meeting to order. This is the first committee of the whole public meeting that I have presided over, and I want to begin by expressing my gratitude to everyone who is here around this table. And I would also like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the homelands, the unceded Algonquin homelands, and that I really want to express my gratitude to the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. And I hope that there will be greater opportunities to express our gratitude and to acknowledge these lands as we move forward as the Committee of the Whole Public. As I mentioned, this is the first meeting that we're here together, and I know there are a few new faces around the table, and so I would like to take a quick moment, an opportunity to do a round table where I will ask that you introduce yourself, the zone that you live in or that you work in, I should say, as a trustee. And for our representatives from the federations and from the committees, if you could also introduce yourself and say who you're here representing, it would be a good way for us to start to get to know each other in the great conversations we're going to have today. And so I'm happy to start, and maybe we'll move over to my left. So I'm Justine Bell. I am the trustee responsible for Somerset, and a lot of really great schools and educators and students in that zone. Actually, I probably said a little bit too much, so I'll just move it over. Trustee Jennekins.
And thank you, Chair. My name is Trustee Jennifer Jennekins. I represent Zone 7, which is Riverside South, Finley Creek, and Osgood.
My name is Donna Dixon. Can you hear me? I'm Zone 8. I represent Orleans, Cumberland, Navan, and further beyond.
I'm Trustee Kaplan Mirth. I am the trustee for Zone 9, which includes Capital Ward and Alta Vista Ward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lyra. I'm the trustee for Rideau Vanier, Rideau Rockcliffe, which is Zone 6, and I am the chair of the board.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Lee, trustee for Zone 11, which is River and Gloucester Southgate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Milburn. I'm the trustee for Zone 12, which is Beacon Hill, Ennis, Orleans.
Now I'm noticing there's a couple of empty chairs right now. Are those people online? So we have Philip Battison and we also have Natasha Baines. I don't think they are. Suzanne Lyon as well from the Parent Involvement Committee. Nope. Over to you, Seema.
It's Seema Lamba. I'm the Advisory Committee on Equity representative, and I live in the Bay Ward.
And I see we have Pat Dixon, and over to you, Andrew.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Andrew Nordman. I'm the principal at Roland Michener Public School, and I represent the Elementary Operations Committee.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Gagne. I'm principal at Sir Robert Borden High School. Tonight, I am here for Steve Spidell, representing the Ottawa-Carleton Secondary School Administrators Network. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Susan Gardner and Stephanie Kirky and Thomas Holloway are also not present at the moment. Over to you, Trustee Scott.
I'm Lynn Scott, trustee for Zone 1, which is West Carleton, March, Stittsville, Rideau, Jock.
Hi, bonjour. My name is Alicia Aziz. I'm trustee for Zone 2, which is Canada North and Canada South.
Trustee Blackburn.
Hi, hi, I'm Donna Blackburn.
We can't hear you, Trustee Blackburn.
Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Do you want to try one more time? Unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Well, I'm not on mute.
I'm going to ask that our tech wizards look into that, and we'll come back to you, Trustee Blackburn, for your introduction. Over to you, Suzanne Nash.
Hi, Suzanne Nash. I'm trustee for Zone 4, Bay and Kitchissippi. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Presley. I am the trustee for Zone 5, which encompasses College Ward as well as Maribel-Knoxdale Ward.
And then we have our student trustee Aldelemi on the line. Okay. Over to you, Trustee Ho.
Hi, my name is Anton Ho. I'm the other student trustee.
And most people recognize our incredible education director, Camille Williams-Taylor, to my right. Can we try again with Donna Blackburn?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'm Donna Blackburn. I'm the trustee for Barhaven East, Barhaven West.
Thank you very much. And I see that Stephanie Kirky has joined us. Did you want to say who you represent?
Thanks, Matt. My name is Stephanie Kirky. My pronouns are she and her, and I represent secondary contract teachers.
Thank you, Ms. Kirky. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very important for me as vice chair presiding over these meetings that everyone feels empowered to share their voice and to contribute in a way that is very productive to paving the way forward for the students that we have within our board. And so again, I thank each and every one of you for showing up tonight. And so let's get down to business. The approval of the agenda. Can I have a mover to approve the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Dixon. Do we have any changes and or additions to the agenda? Okay, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. Now is the point of the meeting where I will ask if anyone has an interest to declare, to please do so now. Not seeing any of those. We will move on to the briefing from the chair of the board. So that would be you, Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to acknowledge that today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. This comes in memory of the 14 young women murdered at Polytechnique, Montreal on December 6th, 1989. This day is about remembering those who have experienced gender-based violence and those who we have lost to it. Sadly, it's a situation that too many continue to face in their homes or in the community. This was only exacerbated throughout the pandemic as police services, shelters, and local organizations reported an increase in calls related to gender-based violence. As we remember, December 6th is a time to highlight this important issue and to speak up against harmful behaviors, hatred, and misogyny. Also, in the news in November, in the upcoming departure of the Director, Williams-Taylor, I would like to note that the Board of Trustees has appointed Executive Officer Michelle Giroux to serve as Director of Education and Secretary of the Board on an interim basis effective January 9th. She will serve in the role of Director until a permanent candidate is selected by the Board of Trustees later in 2023. We are very pleased that she has accepted this position and look forward to working with her in this role in the new year. Michelle has been a very active member of the senior team for over 17 years and brings a wealth of skills and experience to the role. Her appointment brings stability, credibility, and continuity to the important work of the school district, and in particular will support the newly elected Board of Trustees in developing our next strategic plan. We will be extending our thanks and appreciation to Directors Williams-Taylor at our board meeting on December 20th. I would also like to congratulate students at John McCrae Secondary School, Nepean High School, and Osgood Township High School, Sir Robert Borden, who have organized the Relay for Life youth events in 2022. We received an update from the Canadian Cancer Society that these events raised an incredible $272,000. The Cancer Society told us that, quote, these events created hope for those living with and beyond cancer, while at the same time provided students an opportunity to learn about philanthropy and the power of helping others, end quote. Thank you for this tremendous achievement. On the topic of giving back, I would also like to highlight the efforts of schools across the district who have been launching collection drives for the food bank and are seeking donations for local charities. We know these efforts will have a dramatic impact on our community. It's so wonderful to see schools demonstrating our culture of caring and social responsibility, especially at this time of year. And that is all for my report, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for the chair on her report? Okay, seeing none, Director Williams-Taylor, can you please provide us with your briefing?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Monday, December 5th was International Volunteer Day. I wanted to say a special thank you to all of the amazing volunteers out there contributing to our schools. This year, we've seen school councils holding incredible events and activities in support of students across the district. This includes a recent polar bear fair at Bayview, a book fair at Rockcliffe Park, a snowsuit swap at Dunlop, a bake sale for Featherston, and many other great initiatives. The hard work and dedication of school council members and all the parents, students, families, and staff volunteering their time are helping to bring our communities together. Thank you. We would like to invite students in grades 8 through 11, along with their families, to join us in an a virtual information session on Thursday, December the 8th at 7 p.m. This session, organized by our Innovation and Adolescent Learning team, will provide details about all aspects of high school. The sessions will have live captions in multiple languages and also have live translation for Arabic, Farsi, Somali, Mandarin, Korean, Dari, Hindi, Pashto, and Urdu. To register and learn more, please visit the OCDSB website. Finally, this week, students across the district will be participating in an hour of code activities. This 1-hour introduction to computer science uses fun tutorials to teach the basics of coding and demonstrate that anyone can learn to code. Hour of Code events take place in more than 180 countries. It's an opportunity to spark an interest in science and technology. And that's all for my report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Director. Do we have any questions for the Director? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to delegations. Are there any delegations tonight? No, there are not. And then we move on to the report from statutory and other committees. The first we have in front of us is the Indigenous Education Council from 15 September 2022. I call for a mover to receive the report. Thank you, Trustee Dixon. Are there any errors or omissions? Okay, seeing none, I will call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? Thank you. That passes. On to the Parent Involvement Committee from 21 September 2022. Can I have a mover to receive the report? Thank you, Trustee Aziz. Are there any errors or omissions? I will now call the vote to receive the report. That passes. On to Advisory Committee on Equity from 29th of September 2022. I will now call for a mover to receive the report. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, are there any errors or omissions? I will now call the vote to receive the report. Great, thank you. On to our Special Education Advisory Committee meeting from the 12th of October 2022. Trustee Scott, are you moving to receive the report? Thank you very much. Are there any errors or omissions in the report? I will now call the vote to receive the report. Thank you very much. Now on 19th October, Parent Involvement Committee, can I have a mover to receive the report? Thank you, Trustee Nash. Are there any errors or omissions? I will now call the vote to receive the report. Thank you very much. And the 20th of October, there was the Indigenous Education Council report. Can I have a mover to receive it? Thank you, Trustee Presley. Are there any errors or omissions? No, I will now call the vote to receive the report. Thank you. So we've been a little busy here at the OCDSB with all of those reports. So thank you very much, all received. We'll now move on to matters for discussion. We have report 22-081, and that's the update on planning process for the 2023 to 2027 strategic plan. Director Williams-Taylor, will you kindly introduce the report?
Thank you, through you, Chair. We do have a presentation this evening for trustees and the public, just to give an update as to where we are with this process and where we need to be going. Just a couple of key points to the letter of transmission that was transmittal rather that was provided. There is a correction within the letter of transmittal because there is reference to a 2023 to 2037 strategic framework. That's a little ambitious. We did mean to say 2027, so just a correction there. But also to call attention to the fact that while it is that we look at a strategic plan and there is a framework for a plan to be developed, that the focus of the plan is truly about vision, spirit, and intention. The strategic plan, which is a key charge of the responsibility of the Board of Trustees, is indeed to set a vision for the experience of students and communities, as opposed to an operational list. Our operational lists come out of the plan, but the plan truly is a vision setting exercise. Today, the presentation will help us to understand how it is that we are going to draw upon the voices of trustees, the voices of community, to set the vision that is responsive to what we have learned from our past plan and building forward into where the district needs to go next. At the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for trustees to engage in sharing spirit, intention, vision from the point of view of big picture, big vision items that they would like to see discussed or that are responsive to some of the vision that our communities would like to see come forward. So I will turn it over to Manager Andrew Rahim and to Executive Officer Giroux, who will take us through a presentation to provide an outline and as to where it is that we're going. So over to you both.
Thanks very much. And Mike, if you can just bring the presentation up, that would be great. And I'll just start by saying for everyone, this is a first look at for the new board at our strategic plan. And our strategic planning cycle starts, it started in the spring and it runs through until next year. And so for those trustees who are reelected, some of this information you will be very familiar with because it's very similar to a report we brought to the previous board. But we did, the process is designed intentionally to overlap the outgoing board and the incoming board. And this process is really an opportunity for the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board to ensure that students, staff, families, and community partners have an opportunity to help the Board of Trustees and the senior staff shape the priorities of the school district. And school boards are required to have a multi-year strategic plan. And as part of the orientation and learning we're doing with the new board, we refer you to the module around strategic planning. And hopefully if you've had a chance to look at that, it talks about some of the key elements. What we're going to do tonight is talk a little bit about our process and some of the things that are going to happen in the next few months, and lead you through that. And I think that as we think about the strategic planning process, and we think about the consultation and the opportunity for community input into the development of the plan, it is really the way that we establish the roadmap for the board for your term. And it's also hopefully the document that informs and guides your decision-making and keeps our conversations in the boardroom focused on what's happening in schools and in the classroom. So an important piece there. And so if we look at the next slide, please, Mike. So we talk about strategic planning. I've touched on this, the accountability, transparency piece, and making sure that you at the outset of your term have a chance to set a direction and have something to measure against at the end of your term. So this is a module from the strategic planning unit in the Ontario Education Services Corporation module. So you'll see the 4 phases: getting organized. That's what happens, the work we do in the background, getting ready. And that was bringing a report to the board, getting it approved, and setting up the process. And phase 2 is the gathering information. That's really the input stage. That's where we are right now. That's what Andrea is going to speak to you about. In phase 3, and we'll move there late February, March, where we actually will take all of that input and start developing the multi-year plan. And then phase 4, the implementation of the and monitoring period. And that runs for the balance of your term. So that gives you that overview. Next slide, please, Mike. So our framework. And I think the key piece here is the framework of this plan is centered around student learning. And I'm going to hand over to Andrea at this point to talk a little bit about what we've done in this plan design and where it is we're going.
Thank you. So the framework that you'll find attached as Appendix A really highlights those 3 phases that we brought forward in June and did have approved by the board at that time, where we really want there to be 3 main components to this strategic planning process, where we're first and foremost listening to what the people are telling us and listening to what we're finding out from the data. As an organization, we have a wealth of data at our fingertips, so we want to make sure that we're utilizing that alongside the consultation, where we're hearing the stories and the experiences of the people in our community. And we want to use that to leverage that data and those stories to build a plan that unifies our community. And then we want to use all of that in the plan to lead with care and to lead with purpose. And we see these 3 pieces as being very interconnected. And as was mentioned, really centered around students and their learning. Next slide, please. So our general timeline, as mentioned, was the approval of the process in June. We are currently in the process of developing the environmental scan, which I'll touch on in more detail in a few moments. And we are entering the consultation phase. So right now we've been doing some early listening, but we're getting ready to launch some participation pathways that we'll also get into in more detail, and focusing on the development of strategies that will really help us reach those diverse communities, and we'll continue that work, and the bulk of it will be done early in the new year. And then of course in the spring will be the development of the plan, with a key event being the retreat, and then finally approval of the plan for launch in September. So next slide. So as I mentioned, there are 4 main participation pathways, one of which is one-to-one conversations. So as we were talking about the strategic plan and one of the things that we want to achieve, one of the key topics that came up was that we really just want to have the opportunity for system leaders to talk to our parents, to talk to our students, and to talk to our staff, to find out what their priorities are, what their experiences are, how they're connected to the OCDSB and how that's shaping them. What did they think is important for student learning and student well-being? And we thought that by building those connections and having authentic one-on-one personal conversations would give us some rich stories to build on. So one of the things that we're doing is we're asking members of the senior team, as well as trustees, to each have at least 5 conversations with members of the community. So in the near future, we'll be sending an invite out to stakeholders to ask them to sign up if they're interested in having a conversation. This invitation will go to parents, students, staff, and community partners. If they're interested, they'll share a little bit of information with us, and then we'll use that to select hopefully a diverse group of participants to engage in these conversations. So you'll receive contact information from individuals as we're asking you to go out and conduct these interviews, and senior staff will be engaging in these as well. And I apologize, I did use the word interview, but I hesitate to use that word because they really are just genuine conversations to get to know the experiences of people in the district. Another participation pathway is the small group conversations. When we brought this report forward in June, one of the things that we heard from the advisory committees is that they're anxious to have the opportunity to contribute to the development of this strategic plan in a meaningful way. And so we're developing a toolkit that can be used at advisory group meetings to not only gather information that's informative in the consultation itself, but to also help us inform our consultation strategies as we're trying to engage with the community. In addition, we're looking at having public gatherings. These are events that we're having on 3 nights. So mark your calendars for January the 12th, January the 19th, and February the 2nd of the new year. 2 of those events will be held in person and 1 will be held virtually. Those events will be events that we're asking members of the senior team and trustees to attend so that members of the community can come and have small group conversations, mingle with different members of the senior team, have the opportunity to chat with their trustees in a somewhat informal setting in both in-person and virtual events. And then finally, looking at having online conversations. So in these conversations, we don't have the opportunity to get quite as deep, but we do have the opportunity to reach further, get a larger number of participants who want to engage in the process, but maybe aren't available to commit to an entire evening to come in and have conversations. So we wanted to have some strategies there as well. Next slide, please. As mentioned, we are currently in the process of developing the environmental scan. This is a compilation of data that really creates a profile of the organization. We're building this collaboratively with district staff from across different departments, and we're drawing on data from several sources, including data from our community partner organizations. We're using this information to make conclusions, consider impact, and we'll be sharing this environmental scan with you in the new year. This environmental scan and the information from the consultation itself will be used for collaborative plan development. So this is where we're leveraging what we've learned from the community and from our data analysis to build a plan that unifies. Next slide, please. So this will inform the development of the strategic plan's mission, values, and priorities. And as Director Williams-Taylor mentioned, this is really to establish the vision for the district and where we're headed over the next 4 years, not until 2037. A key event in the collaborative plan development will be the retreat, which is March 31st and April 1st, where we'll be coming together to really talk about what we've learned from all of our work up until that point. And then finally, we'll have the launch and implementation of the strategic plan. So that will launch in September of 2023, where the new strategic plan will be rolled out to schools and the system. And this is where we're leading with care, creating awareness and building connections as we're helping people feel connected to the strategic plan and the organization. And regular progress updates throughout the life of the plan will be presented to the Board of Trustees to report on measurement and monitoring of the plan. This is where we are leading with purpose, promoting transparency and accountability through regular measurement and monitoring. And the plan's priorities and objectives will be used to guide our work in support of student learning and student well-being throughout the course of the plan. So we do have some discussion questions for you to consider. How can we encourage participation and bring new voices into the consultation? How can we best leverage what we learn from the consultation to support the development of a strategic plan that reflects the lived experiences of our students, staff, and families?
How can we be intentional in our focus on the classroom? And what resources will assist trustees in engaging in the development of our strategic plan?
So we're going to pause there and invite you to have the opportunity to ask questions about the process, about planning, et cetera. And then what we'd like to do with your indulgence is to move to our next question, which is putting to this table the kind of question that we're planning to put to parents. This is a very preliminary level, which is, what are 3 things that you think would make a difference to support students and student learning and well-being? So just a chance for amongst you as a new board to share your thoughts about some priorities that you would imagine might be in that new strat plan. But that's our second part of the conversation. There's a lot of process stuff we covered. And so first, we've put those discussion questions, but of course we welcome any questions from you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and for giving us some good food for thought. I see Trustee Aziz has a question.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, thank you for the wonderful presentation. As a new trustee, I'm sure my fellow new and returning trustees appreciate a rundown of the strategic planning process. I'm used to getting the clean version that's pristine, but we don't always get to see the fantastic work that the staff put in. So thank you for that. Because I'm a person of numbers, I have 2 questions. The first question is, in addition to those questions that you mentioned that we put to parents, what resources will be provided, if any, to help guide parents through this process? Because not everyone has the time to read the previous strategic plans and so forth. That's my first question. I'm not sure if it's easier for me to ask the second one now or hold off.
So we create a section on the website where we build in resources. So we include this presentation when we have the environmental scan ready. It will be there. There's a series of other reports. But the environmental scan is one document. There are some other documents that help to inform the process, budgets, some other consultations, things like that. And that's the beauty of working with other departments and collecting resources. And as an example, Learning Support Services has indicated they're doing some mental health reach out. How can we incorporate, some synergy into our reach out and conversation? So try and make a resource place available, recognizing that some stakeholders are interested in doing a lot of reading to inform where they go. Some people just want to speak about their experience and share their experiences and see it as their opportunity to provide input, and then we build on strategies from there. So we do see a real mix of the kind of input we get, and we try and filter all of that.
Okay, perfect. My second question, if I may, is regarding the consultation process. There were kind of 4 opportunities for input to be included. The first 2 regarding one-on-one conversations and small group consultations. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that staff will help trustees coordinate those conversations based on the input you're receiving during the environmental scan. Is that correct?
So the way the authentic conversations will work, as Andrea mentioned, an invitation will go out. But Andrea has put together a great toolkit for the people holding the conversation. And because it's modeled around an authentic conversation, it's not a note-taking exercise. It's not a recorded activity. It's a one-on-one conversation where we give you a toolkit, things to think about going into it. And then what we'll ask is for you to write a sort of 1-page reflection on your learning from the conversation. We're not asking you to narrate someone else's story. We're asking you to reflect on what you learned and how that might inform our work. And that applies for trustees and for this evening.
Perfect. And Vice Chair or Chair, may I ask one final question? Thank you. And this is something I'm sure others are wondering as well regarding inclusion and reaching as many members of the community as we can. What steps, and it's my understanding that you might go into this a little bit further in the second part of the presentation, what steps are being done to address any community members or stakeholders that might have been missed during the previous strategic planning development and consultation?
So a couple of things. One thing we can be proud of is that over the last 4 strategic plans, we have grown stakeholder participation in the planning process exponentially. And by that, I mean going from numbers in the 50 to 250, going back 4 plans to into the tens of thousands. So we've done a good job growing, but we've got lots of opportunity to work on that. And so one thing we heard in our surveying of staff in our employee engagement survey last year was that there was a bit of a disconnect with employees in terms of their connection to the strategic plan. So we've been very intentional on that part because that's a very important voice. And I know you're asking about other voices as well, but just want to touch on that. And so we've made a number of changes to the way we structure the planning process to engage a broader cross-section of employees in the planning process. Tomorrow, we'll be speaking with principals and inviting them both to comment on the process and to share thoughts going forward and talk about strategies for engaging school-based staff, because that will be critical. But we also we'll be looking to meet with our multicultural liaison officers to talk about engagement strategies. We've been working with some of our staff on broader community reach out strategies, looking at translation. We've been intentional in the locations that we selected for our large group meetings, that we were going to some different school communities, and we'll do a cross section of outreach to the community when we do that. And then, of course, we've thought about both the online and the in-person opportunities. So, and I guess the last thing I would say on this is some might ask, why are the authentic conversations coming? Why are we inviting people to that as opposed to us just going out and doing that? And the intention there is to make sure anyone interested has access to a conversation, as opposed to inviting senior staff and trustees to go out and speak with people in their network. So we're trying to invite anyone who might not otherwise have that opportunity to at least express interest, and that will help us also encourage their participation in other areas. So.
Perfect. And if I may, I swear, last question.
No, Trustee Aziz, I wanted to say you have 1 minute and 12 seconds,
there's
so
the timer.
take your time.
I was like, I don't see the timer. Thank you very much. So that was fantastic. That addressed that question perfectly. And my follow-up is, this is going to sound funny, are we following up with those we're consulting with on their satisfaction with this process? So for future reference, if stakeholders are satisfied or the community is feeling that the online application or form for feedback worked really well, or there was an issue with translation service, is there a way that we're making sure that we can reflect on this consultation for future reference?
Yes, and so the first thing is I omitted a really important part in my answer to your previous question, and that was the small group conversations, because those small group conversations are with our advisory committees, and in those conversations we have folks who usually are engaged in a specific area or interest or topic, but also a number of those committees create an opportunity for us to talk about reach out to specific communities and groups. So that's another way of expanding reach. So sorry about that. In terms of following up on satisfaction and process, yes, we get a lot of feedback on a lot of those tools. And I talked about the employee input and how that employee feedback helped to inform this presentation. And we did a number of different reach outs to students and families in the last couple of years. And we took that feedback about different strategies and tried to build it in.
Okay, and another question regarding accessibility. How are we ensuring that this process takes into consideration the various accessibility considerations for different members of our community?
So all of the tools, there's one piece, so the in-person piece, we've got some considerations built in there. The website allows us some flexibility. We've got accommodation capacity, and we're working on some translation and interpretation functionality district-wide for general purposes, so that's there. There's also physical space accommodation issues, so that will be something we look at as we use the spaces, and most of our spaces are accessible. And then the last piece is in terms of the online platforms, and we're just doing an RFP for online platforms, and accessibility is one of the considerations there. So I can't speak to the specific platform at this time, but that's a consideration in those decisions.
Will the public be able to see which locations have which accessibility options, like wheelchair ramp at this location if you can't make this one and so forth?
All of our schools should have
Beautiful.
accessible locations.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Trustee Aziz. We have next on our list Trustee Nash, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, and then we have Suzanne Lyon and a couple others. So over to you, Trustee Nash.
Thank you, Trustee Aziz. You've asked some excellent questions. I have a few others. In terms of the public consultation, we're already, what I have here on my screen is November 2022 to February 2022. So from November to December, what is already, I mean, November is already over and December is almost halfway if you consider the holidays. What has already taken place in terms of consult?
So in the timelines, we gave you sort of the marker pieces of dates that we set up in our initial report. And so we're here at the first meeting of Committee of the Whole. We had originally anticipated we might have an opportunity in November to be here, but wanted to come here and speak with trustees. What we've been doing in that timeframe is getting all of the resources ready so that we're ready to launch immediately following this presentation.
Very good, thank you. And my second question is, and certainly I'll be looking to my colleagues, especially those who have already been involved in the process and the board to how best to engage and so forth with my constituents. But I had a question in terms of the expectations. How do you manage expectations? Because yes, people will be coming to us, and most of the times those will involve resources. You know, I've already heard class size and more supports for mental health and so forth. So how do you manage those expectations when you go about to such a process?
Well, I think that's the fundamental challenge for the board in developing the plan, right? Is how do we reflect on what we heard? And then how do we take all those ideas, because there'll be a lot of ideas for change or enhancement or difference. How do we take those and weave together a plan that is sustainable and achievable over the course of the mandate? And it's not easy work, but we don't try to set conditions at the input stage on what people can offer, but we do try to explain that everybody can contribute their ideas, and the plan is developed based on the building together those ideas and trying to figure out, you know, what key strategies would help us to move in that direction. But we definitely get differences of opinion. Every strategic planning consultation, we've got a group of parents who say more homework and a group of parents that say no homework, and that's probably not you know, the biggest issue, but it's a good example of a great dichotomy in feedback.
Can I pass it over to Director?
If I may interject as well, Trustee Nash, one of the opportunities in the model that's being presented is that it is a dialogue. And so there's an opportunity for staff to ask clarifying questions. Sometimes the goals or the undertakings that come up in these conversations are to get to a goal that we're trying to understand. So people will come forward with ideas of strategies, whereas a part of the dialogue allows us to ask questions about what it is that the hopes and the vision of the community is, because we may collaboratively be able to structure different avenues to get to some of those outcomes. So it's a platform for greater understanding, not just of what the community wants to do, but how the community wants to be and how the community wants to feel in the OCDSB. So there's a reciprocal exchange, which is the beauty of this model.
Thank you.
Trustee Nash, do you have any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And then I have Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you. My questions are similar to, but sort of build on what Trustee Aziz was asking before. And I think I would like to know, as a trustee who wasn't here when the last strategic plan was developed, but I've participated in others in other organizations, I would like to know whose voices were missing in the previous strategic planning process. So if we have access to some feedback or consultation review from the last time that there was a strategic plan developed, I'd like to know what was found to be the gap or the missing voice in that process. What barriers were encountered? What can we do differently this time from what happened 4 years ago? And if we can learn from that process, then that will help to inform us as we go through this process. So that's a question. The question is do we have access to any kind of analysis of what happened in the last strategic plan? That's my first question, and maybe you can answer that, and then and then I have another question as well.
So in the previous plan, two things. One, we used Thought Exchange. And we used Thought Exchange, which is an online conversation tool, in two ways. We used it to collect feedback at the input stage. And then when we had that feedback, we assembled it in terms of a list of priorities. And then we invited feedback on that as well. And so I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, and I don't know if Andrew remembers what the participation rate was. I can follow up on that, but we had a significant participation. Did we have all voices? Absolutely not. Do we know where we didn't have some voices? Yes, in a couple of areas. In one case, online participation doesn't work for everybody. And we had in fact, we had more in-person meetings scheduled the last time, and they were distributed across the city. That was better in some respects, except that we experienced a cold snap, and it was -50 for about a 2-week period during the consultations that led to one, low turnout, and two, a number of building and transportation issues. So we did lose some feedback there. This time we were a little bit more intentional in creating some spaces for one-to-one, the one-to-one conversation, and also not as many virtual, or sorry, large events. But that doesn't get to the part of your question that is, are there specific groups or voices that aren't heard? That will always be the case. The question is, how can we increase those? So that's part of our conversation with the MLOs. Also, the translation and interpretation services available this time is different, and that may make it easier for folks. And we'll be talking with schools. We did do some specific reach out strategies with some schools that were interested in how do we engage in a particular school community, and creating smaller conversations that were with the school community more directly. So the school helped us to facilitate some of those.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, sometimes even the time of day that meetings are held would be impossible for somebody who works in an evening or who has children and is a single parent. But that's great. Just, you know, if there's any way that we can be involved to make sure that we do reach all, especially otherwise marginalized populations, that would be really important. The second question that I have is, do we as trustees make ourselves available for conversations about this with parent councils and with our constituents? Or do you want us to keep it to the one-on-one conversations that you have organized for us? Because I know that, you know, we're being invited to speak to parent council, and we have, you know, interested constituents, but I'm not sure if you want us to or not, or don't want us to have conversations outside of the structured plan that you have.
So I think the answer to that is yes to both. So what we really would like you to do is to encourage everyone in your communications to be a part of the consultation processes because they're coming to those conversations with intentionality. But at the same time, trustees engage in a lot of conversations. And I think this gets partly at Trustee Nash's question about you can't solve every issue in every conversation, but you certainly can make constituents aware that we are engaged in a strategic planning process. And, you know, those are thoughts or ideas that you can bring forward, and you encourage their participation. So absolutely, remember that at the end of the day, we're going to come together and look at a report of the consolidated feedback, and you're going to be contributing to that conversation and bringing some context and your own experience in there. So absolutely to both.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. Suzanne Lyon from the Parent Involvement Committee, if you would like to ask your question or give your comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. So thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you for building into the consultation plan an opportunity for the advisory committees to participate. My questions are, what resources will be available to support those advisory committees? You did mention that there was a toolkit available for facilitators. Will that be made available to the advisory committees to pick and other committees? Can we go out and organize our own events and consultations, or again, do we work in line with the board? And typically for PIC, that means working through Superintendent Duas, who is an excellent and lovely resource. And with respect to the website-based consultation process, perhaps just a comment and a little bit of feedback based on some things that we've heard from parents, and that has been, in addition, my own experience as a parent over the last 14 years or so with children in the board. The OCDSB website is cumbersome and busy and heavy. And not always easy to navigate. So perhaps the section that deals with this consultation process could be really stripped down and simplified and clarified with very accessible language and a minimum of clutter, so that parents have the easiest time possible navigating through that process online. My final little question would be, would trustees and senior staff be available to come to some of the sessions that the Parent Involvement Committee might organize? Thank you very much for this excellent work. I'll just add finally that PIC is also in the process of bringing on board new members, and our new members will be joining our first meeting in January, where we will be also working on our strategic planning process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I will pass it over to the executive officer to respond to some of those questions.
I think Andrea will answer.
Take that one. Thank you. Some great questions. We are very excited about the toolkit, so I'm glad you mentioned that. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to engage with the advisory committees as a resource that can inform our process. In the advisory committee toolkit, We will have a short either recorded presentation or some slides with some speaking notes with an overview of the strategic planning process, as well as some tools to facilitate conversation around that table. So that'll include both sort of an electronic tool and an activity that the group can use to engage in some collaborative priority setting, as well as some strategy development as far as helping us to reach other communities. As far as having events outside of those advisory committees, the challenge with that is then consolidating the feedback from those conversations to make sure that it's included in the feedback that's being used to inform the development of the strategic plan when we're coming back together as a larger group. So ideally, it would be that the toolkits are used at that table and those strategies are then used centrally to try to engage with those communities. So definitely open to having those conversations and reaching out to those groups. One of the things that I do want to talk about is the online presence and how we're using the website and online tools as an engagement strategy in the consultation. We did mention that we are currently engaging in an RFP process, and that's sort of a two-part request for proposals that we have out. And one of those pieces is actually for establishing an engagement platform, because we completely agree that we need something that is clean and simple for parents, for staff, and for students to be able to arrive at a landing page that is very clear to them what the participation pathways are for this consultation, how they engage in those. And so the second part of that RFP request for proposals is for an conversational tool online that ideally would be embedded within that platform, so that there's a landing page where they have access to all of the different parts of the consultation and how they can engage, and one of those clearly being identified as the online component of the consultation. And as mentioned, one of the very top priorities for that conversational tool is things such as translation capacity, so that people don't experience barriers when they're trying to engage in those conversations online.
Thank you for those responses. I have a list that includes Seema Lamba, Trustee Scott, Trustee Milburn, Trustee Blackburn, and Trustee Dixon. And so over to you, Seema Lamba, from the Advisory Committee on Equity.
So some questions have sort of been asked, but I just wanted to expand on a few. So how will you be measuring the participation of marginalized and community?
Seema, is it possible for you to speak a little bit closer to the mic?
Sure. I don't know if you were able to hear my question. How will you be measuring the participation of marginalized and equity communities? And in that process, like, or is it going to be like, we don't have enough, so we're going to take extra steps to do that? Or is it just like, oh, this is how much we have and we'll have to just deal with it? Because I did hear that there were voices missing from the last one. So how are you going to ensure you're not missing those voices?
It's a great question, and we've been working through this and trying to find a balance on collecting data from participants so that we would have measurable data that could inform whose voices are we hearing. The flip side is we don't want to make the process so burdensome or so intentional that we're scaring people away from participating in the process. And so this is the kind of struggle that we've been having. We've been looking at, for the authentic conversations, do you want to talk about the kinds of questions at the front end?
Sure. So we are planning to ask a few demographic questions in the sign up for the authentic conversations. But we're being very strategic about that, and that information is only being used to take a stratified approach to selecting participants, assuming that we have a large number of people that are looking to sign up, because we really want to make sure that we're getting at some of those voices that we don't typically get to hear in these kinds of conversations. So that demographic information is being collected exclusively for the sign up. So for example, if a member of the senior team is going to be conducting 5 interviews or 5 conversations, they will only be receiving the contact information and the name of that individual. They will not be receiving their demographic information. We want them to go in to have an open conversation where the individual can share the information that they would like to, but that nothing is being shared beyond that. But that information is being used to make sure that we are intentional in who we're selecting to engage in that part of the process, with the hopes that we have so many people signing up for these conversations that we have lots to pick from.
Okay, so can I just, so that means you're gonna create a group of people from marginalized and equity groups that will be contacted. Is that what basically, yeah?
The intent is to target people from those groups. Absolutely.
Okay. And then the next question I had is around the toolkit. Because I'm the representative for ACE. Sometimes when we get consulted, whichever way through the toolkit, it's often very briefly, and we don't like get to be, we're not consulted in a real meaningful way during the meeting. So I was just wondering how this toolkit will overcome that challenge where it's like there's a presentation for 5 minutes and then there's input for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, which really is not that meaningful if if it's a large group.
So I think one of the things to think about is how do we make this a part of the conversations of advisory committees? And so one thing we've been working on is encouraging advisory committees to think about having a work plan for the year and talking about things. I hear you completely on some consultations are very short. This toolkit is intended to allow us to have a presentation and have a conversation, but it doesn't mean that's the only conversation or opportunity for the advisory committee. So there are a few things there. Some advisory committees will play an instrumental role in helping us reach out to other groups, but also because we're only at the input stage and we know that we'll be coming out with a draft plan in the spring, there's an ongoing opportunity for the advisory committee to look at this issue. So it's not only one time, right? It's that first conversation, and then in the months in between, advisory committees can be thinking about what are the issues that they're dealing with and how might those inform their work. Remember that every advisory committee has a trustee member, at least one, and those trustee members are there and they're listening, and so they're also able to bring that feedback back to their conversations. And once we have a draft plan, that also comes back out for feedback. So advisory committees ought to be thinking about those spring meetings and making sure that there's a place on there to be looking at it and thinking about it. So that's some of the information we'll share in our documents.
Sorry. My last question is really, it's really for me because sometimes I get confused with so many different things. How does sort of the equity roadmap and the, and I'm not sure if everybody knows what the equity roadmap is, so I'll let you explain that. And the surveys around like valuing
voices.
Yeah, valuing voices, right? Because there was one a few years ago, and is there a new one coming up? And how is that? Because valuing voices is also a survey about students' well-being and health, right? It's a survey along that. So how do they work or overlap with this?
So let's think about the strategic plan. The strategic plan is the multi-year strategic plan. It sets the values, priorities, and key strategies of the board for a 4-year period. In our current strategic plan, it's built on a culture of innovation, a culture of caring, and a culture of social responsibility. Within that plan, there's quite a focus, as you know, on equity. And so the identity-based data collection, which was the Valuing Voices survey, is one of the pieces of work that was done under the early part of the current strategic plan. And so you'll see that, that's referenced in there. And the equity roadmap is also taking one of the areas of priority from our strategic plan and going deeper and saying, here's the key work we're going to do in equity. So the strat plan is the roadmap, and that's why the strat plan doesn't have every single thing we're going to do, right? That's how we can get it to a one page. It says, here's the high level roadmap of things that we want to do as an organization. And over the course of 4 years, we'll be drilling down deeper and developing some strategies and mapping out in more detail. So that hopefully explains the architecture. In terms of identity-based data collection, that's a good example of a project that moves from an identified priority where it's a new initiative and you want to take it to something like people ask often, how does work carry from one plan to the next? All right. So sometimes there are things in a current plan that the work is incomplete and it carries forward. Sometimes the area of focus shifts a little bit. So on identity-based data, for example, I'm not saying it does or doesn't need to be included in the next strategic plan, but the work and the understanding of the need and the value is already in place. What we're currently talking about with the data collection is what is the cycle and when is the next process and how can we improve the process, because we know the purpose of collection is good. We know how to use the data. We now just have to refine when and how we collect it. So that's to that I would say it's a little bit more regularized as part of our work plan now. So it's not that it doesn't contribute to our strategic priorities, but we've learned and we've embedded that in. Does that make sense?
Ms. Lamba, do you have any further questions or follow-up?
Just on that, I think the results of those that survey, right, would be informing you in some of the strategies or the issues, right? And I think, am I hearing you correct that it did for the last strategic plan? I thought it was developed in the last strategic plan. Now, wouldn't the results be something that we would want to be using forward to develop the strategic plan? And unless there's another survey that's going to be coming out, I'm a bit confused.
Okay, so absolutely, the data that we collected in the Valuing Voices survey absolutely informs some of the priorities going forward. So when you think about the data collected from Valuing Voices and how we've used it, we've used that data to do more detailed reports on credit accumulation, on suspension data. And so then we look at that data and we say, okay, what did we learn from that? And we also look at those reports and say, what other areas do we need to apply this kind of data to? So definitely that's happening. I'm happy to have a conversation about the collection of identity-based data, and I'm sure that that will come up again. But in the context of the strat plan, it absolutely informs our work and we'll make decisions about how and what it looks like. So that's definitely something that the Advisory Committee on Equity might comment on in terms of what does it look like and where is it going.
Thank you, Ms. Lamba. Thank you. Over to you, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think where Ms. Lamba left off is where I'd like to pick up because I do see the Valuing Voices data and a number of other things that we've done over the past 4 years as being really useful in this process. And I would expect to see some of those things showing up as part of the environmental scan information so that we have that and our community has that as a basis for starting to think strategically about where we need to take this next. So first of all, could staff confirm that those kinds of data will be part of the environmental scan?
That is correct.
Thank
And
you.
also a part of the resources available when we talk about other resources that people may want to look at. If you want to look at those in more depth, also available.
And of course, the next question is, when might we expect to see some version of the environmental scan? Because our retreat is not that far into the new year. Our consultations, much of that will be happening in January. Our advisory committees do not have 6 months of meetings to get their initial input and initial discussions put together. And I think all of them will also be benefiting from the environmental scan information. So any timelines for that?
If Andrea wasn't here tonight, she'd be busy working on it. We have been meeting with colleagues from other departments and collecting their feedback and their data sources and input. We've been looking at the new StatsCan data. And so our challenge right now is trying to take all of the data sources and put them into some kind of digestible format. And so hopefully early in the new year, we will have a document. And I think maybe the difference today versus what we did years ago is it's not the production of a paper document. It's something that we might be able to continue to grow and build a little bit. So, but we will take your sense of urgency back to our planning table.
Thank you. And lastly, I'd like to say I'm quite happy about the shift away from total reliance on thought exchange, which was extremely useful. When we started using it, I think people have got a little bit tired of it. I've seen the participation levels declining as we've used it repeatedly for various purposes since we first started that. I love the idea of the one-on-one conversations. And I guess, Madam Chair, I would also remind my colleagues that we as trustees are collecting input to our strategic planning every time we have a conversation with a parent, every time we have a conversation with a community member, every time we visit a school, every time we read a school newsletter. In those conversations, which are often about very specific topics, parents do express their hopes for the system, for their children. They do express their concerns about the things that aren't going well for their students at this time. And we as trustees have the opportunity to store that information in our heads and begin to synthesize it into something that does represent what I would call a reasonably authentic version of the state of affairs in our own communities that we can then bring into the discussion when we have our retreat and subsequently. Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing all of that in one page, Trustee Scott. Great. Over to you, Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. My first question is, it's great to see all the consultation opportunities available for the school community. When we are promoting these opportunities to the community, is there going to be plans to use other means other than email or online tools? For an example, a handout newsletter to send home with students or something on a bulletin board, something that is not just reliant on online.
So we do use a range of tools. There are some, maybe some schools, I doubt there are very many schools still using paper-based newsletters. Looking at Andrew, because most parents express a preference for online newsletters because they don't have to dig them out of the bottoms of backpacks and they know that they get them. So I can't say that paper newsletters, but we do look at, for example, one of the things we've done in the past is use Chin Radio to promote sessions, and that allows for multilingual language promotion. We look at, again, I wish I could put MLOs. We've looked at the Family Reception Center. We can definitely include school bulletin boards and some of those things, the school council newsletter. so that there gets to be conversation amongst school council communities, some of those pieces.
Great. And the only reason I bring it up is because if we are looking to target people that we don't normally hear from, looking at means outside of our normal online would be great. And building on what you said, are there any other specific community partners or organizations you're planning to work with to promote these different opportunities to give feedback?
Yes, in a couple of respects. So we routinely include a consultation session or a couple of consultation sessions. They're daytime meetings with community partner organizations who do regular business with the school district for their perspective. So examples that might include the Youth Services Bureau, Ottawa Public Health, Child and Youth Ottawa, whole range of OCSO, Parents for Diversity, whole range of organizations that we work with. We also do some awareness with those groups to help get the message out.
That's great to hear. And then my last question is there a plan to do a feedback or what we heard during the consultation phase before the strategic plan is finalized? So when you get the survey results, are you planning to share it back in some form or way before we finalize everything?
So we use our regular communication channels to provide those kinds of updates. And we mentioned we're in an RFP, so that may change some of the tools. But some of those tools have inherently built in some reporting mechanisms back. So it depends on the tool we use, but yes.
Perfect, thank you. And that's all my questions.
Thank you, Trustee Milburn. I'm about to pass the floor over to Trustee Blackburn, and then I have Trustee Dixon and Ms. Kirky on the list. And then just for everyone's awareness, I'll be looking to recess following this discussion for 10 minutes. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to staff, I just wanted to let you know that the context for my questions is that it is my belief that staff morale, and by staff, I mean all staff that work in our schools, not just teachers, but all staff. The staff morale has never been lower. And that this is having, in my view, a negative impact on student achievement and student well-being. And so far, we've talked a lot about parental engagement, community engagement, which of course is key to this conversation. However, I believe that staff engagement is equally important and that our strategic plan needs to address staff morale. So through you, Madam Chair, to the executive officer or to whoever chooses to answer, are you looking at different ways to engage staff? And I would really like us this time to think outside the box and expand those staff conversations beyond each individual school and maybe have, like we're having town halls for members of the community. I would like the opportunity to have town halls with our staff and as a trustee to attend those so that I can hear directly from the staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Director William,
So one of the important parts of this consultation, as mentioned, has been those one-to-one conversations. And we think it's a very important part that for every member of the board or of the senior team that are having those conversations, for at least one of those conversations to be with a staff member, is because we did hear from our staff survey looking at valuing voices that staff do need an increased sense of connection to the strategic plan. So staff engagement has been a critical part of planning for this. And so we want those one-to-one conversations to engage staff as well. In addition, for the online conversations, one thing that has been our past practice that has been very successful, but will be a continued practice when having online conversations in this strategic planning process, is that there will be a separate conversation specifically for staff. so that when staff are engaging in that conversation and a sharing of feedback and potentially priority setting within an online setting, that it wouldn't be that they're engaging in the same conversation that parents and students are participating in, so that each group would have its own distinct conversation, so that the priorities that are important to that particular group can be shared and prioritized in that setting. And as well as we've got the town hall conversations, we're hoping will engage staff as well.
So a couple of other things to think about. I talked at the outset about changing the way we approach the running of the process to include more managers so that we have and principals. So we have more cross-section in the organization and the planning, but also mentioned that tomorrow we'll be speaking with principals. And one of the things we'll be talking about is how to engage school-based staff. And there are a few strategies there in addition to what Andrea spoke about. One of those is, are there opportunities at staff meetings, which sounds easy, but is a bit more complex sometimes. Are there opportunities for town halls, and what would be the best time of day? And the other thing that we need to keep in mind that is different in this strat plan from any of our previous ones, and that is we have now a direct weekly communication with all employees. We did not have that in place in previous strategic plans. So we didn't have the same ability to connect with all employees directly, and we didn't have the same infrastructure in terms of the staff portal in previous plans. And so that gives us a space where we can post information for our employees that's a bit different from the website. So those are some additional strategies that we'll look at. And the other groups that we're looking at are the employee resource groups. So we have a series of employee resource groups, and they will have access to the same kind of toolkit. And the goal talking to those groups is how to engage more voices into the conversations.
Trustee Blackburn, do you have any further comments or questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the reason why I made the comments I made is because I have had dozens and dozens of conversation with various staff. But those conversations, aren't going to be captured other than me telling you that they've happened. They're not documented anywhere, nor will they be. But so I like what I've heard so far, and I will be closely monitoring and continuing to talk to our staff to see if they do feel engaged and listened to, because if we don't improve the current situation, I'm really I'm very concerned about it. And again, it does have a negative impact on our student achievement and their well-being. So I'm hoping that gets addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Over to you, Trustee Dixon.
Can you hear me? I think Selma touched on a couple of my concerns. And I guess the biggest one is we have a lot of diverse families out there especially with language barriers. So how are we going to get to them so we can actually, because when we have it online, I'm sure it's in English. Are we going to be having translators while they're filling out some of the questions? Because that's going to be a big problem if, like, when we're doing the survey, to be able to reach everybody, right? So, or even when we reach out and call, are we going to be able to have somebody that's going to speak that tongue language if they're not, English is not their first language? Because, our schools are filled with a lot of diversity.
So a few things. One, we do have our multicultural liaison officers, and so that can help us in a few different ways. One is in terms of strategies for specific schools and working with our principals as well. So some school-specific strategies can be helpful. We do have interpretation and translation services, so we can think about that. What we do at some consultations is We have someone, like we have done sessions where we identify some languages, and we have someone at the table who can support interpretation so that the small group conversation can happen in different languages. That's also something we look at. And we have, and again, because we're just in the RFP process for the tool, in the tool we were using in the past, there was a way that people could respond in their own language. And so although our initial communication is in English, there are strategies, there are ways that you can respond in the language of your choice. And then that gets translated and included in the feedback in English, and that's fully supported. So there are a bunch of different mechanisms. I'm not going to suggest that there aren't still gaps, but we continue to work to explore and expand those.
And the other question is, and I want to just get a little clearer on it. My colleague Nellie, she also indicated about the times, right? Because we do have a lot of diverse parents that work 2 jobs. So how are we going to be able to reach them? Because when I look at the times for the town hall, they seem to be like just in the evenings. Are we going to try to do a variety of times, or just the time like that 7 to 9? Because
so it's a good question, and one that we can take back and take a look at, because we absolutely can run a daytime session. The challenge is space for daytime sessions, because our spaces are mostly full during the day. So then we have to, so we can rent other spaces or look at other pieces. And so that's a conversation that we might have in a bit more detail when we talk with our principals and take back and sort of think, what could that look like?
Anything else for you, Trustee Dixon?
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Next on my list, I have Stephanie Kirky. I just wanted to say thank you very much for outlining your pronouns when you did the introductions, and for everyone around the table, if I happen to misgender you, please let me know. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Through you, Chair, to the Executive Officer and to Andrea. I guess I sort of a long preamble, and I have a couple of questions. So there have been a few references to the responses of staff to the last Valuing Voices survey, and the clear indication of disconnect they felt between the strategic plan and their work, and that they didn't feel motivated by the strategic plan. Not they disagreed with it, they just didn't feel connected to it. Importantly, 28% of respondents only 28% of respondents believed that positive change would happen as a result of the survey. And looking back at the last thought exchange and seeing themes about workload, burnout, stress, fatigue, I'm still hearing those things, even though the thought exchange occurred during the pandemic, during some really challenging times. I'm still hearing that from members daily, echoing the comments of Trustee Blackburn. Morale and the energy of staff is very low, and I'm speaking on behalf of secondary teachers. So I guess I am looking at there's some really great infographics and lots of great work that's been done here. I guess looking at the listening to what the data is telling us and identifying issues that need to be addressed. Would the board consider that addressing the issues, concerns, challenges staff have identified, like in a tangible way, might actually increase participation and engagement of staff in this process? I know it's sort of an operational question, but I think that's a piece that I think if you want people, or certainly staff, to engage in the process, they need to see that their input has been listened to and is being acted upon.
Absolutely. I think that's a very fair point, and certainly in the employee engagement survey that's being referenced, we did make a point of doing a number of follow-ups on here's what we heard and here's where we're going. And I hear your comments about where is that on an ongoing basis, and there are a number of things that we have continued to do that maybe need to be better reflected back in that way. And that's part of the two-way flow. And certainly also happy to hear from the federations and to collaborate with the federations to encourage employee participation so that we do get that feedback and that input. And we can then make sure that we're hearing that and we're building on it. So thank you.
Supplemental, Chair. I'm looking at I like the variety of opportunities for participation. But I guess one question I have is, and one concern that some staff may come with, the thought exchange, one of the, I guess, advantages of it is that it's anonymous. These would be in person, and some members may feel, just speaking honestly, may feel that there may be a sense of possible reprisal or a negative impact on them for speaking freely. What mechanisms will be in place to ensure that doesn't occur?
So whatever the online mechanism is, will still ensure anonymity. And so that's definitely the case. One of the things I don't think we were clear about in the authentic conversations is we're not reporting who those conversations were with. So that doesn't resolve, do people feel they can speak freely, but when they speak, it's not attributed in any way. So it's designed to allow people to speak freely.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, Executive Officer Giroux, thank you both for your presentation and for answering the questions tonight. I know the question that you wanted to get to towards the end, I have a lot of thoughts in my head, and I'll continue to think about that, and I encourage my fellow trustees and everyone around the table to do so as well, and bring that forth into the conversations that you have. And so with that, let's take a 10-minute break and come back and talk about the money. Seeing that we have quorum, I'm going to invite everyone to come take their seats. And during the break, it was brought to my attention by a number of trustees that they're very much interested in moving on to that question that we left you with, which is will be brought up on the screen in a moment, but ultimately it is, what are the 3 things that you would like to see in the strategic plan? And so what we're going to do before we move on to the money question, the budget, we're going to go around the table by a show of hands, and feel free to state what your 3 priorities that you hope might be a part of our next strategic plan. And remember that this is not debatable. These are just ideas, and this is not the last time that you will be able to bring forth ideas for the strategic plan. So these are just bringing forth some of the main concepts that you would like to see going forward considered. So with that, I will call our session back to order, and we will continue on with agenda item 9.1. And I open up the floor to whoever would like to go first to discuss the question we have on the screen, or to bring forth their 3 ideas. Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, and I'll be short and sweet. My 3 priorities at the moment, when thinking about what could be on the next strategic plan, are tools for measuring and tracking progress and reporting back to the board and the community on how progress is moving on the plan. And that can be a 1 or 2-parter depending on how the board sees and staff see fit. And then also looking at furthering our commitments to equity, diversity, and inclusion. I say furthering because, as others have mentioned, we see our value feedback and equity framework and roadmap. There's been a lot of really great consultation, but I'm looking at concrete steps to really make sure that those commitments are being sowed in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Aziz. I have Donna Blackburn next on the list.
Do you mean Trustee Blackburn?
Yes, Trustee Donna Blackburn.
Thank you. So my top 3 things are staff morale, student achievement, and student well-being.
Thank you very much, Trustee Blackburn. Next, I have Trustee Presley, and then Donna Dixon, Trustee Donna Dixon, and Lyra Evans. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and through you. 3 priorities that I would like to potentially have be part of our next strategic plan would be an emphasis on implementing the over 157 Ontario human rights calls, right to read recommendations as outlined in the report. So I'd like to see an emphasis on implementing some of those recommendations. I would also like us to look into different means, or maybe take a different approach into how we advertise our education pathways offered, such as our English programs, our English French immersion, and our alternative programs. Because what I'm finding from a lot of constituents is that there's a misconception with the programs offered in terms of our alternative programs and our alternate schools. So I feel it would be beneficial to everyone to have a more clear distinction between those and to advertise and highlight the benefits of each. And for my 3rd priority that I would like to see hopefully part of the next strategic plan is further implementation and action regarding the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, specifically referring to education.
Great, thank you very much. Trustee Dixon.
My first that I'd like to see how we can bring breakfast, and I mean a real breakfast, not like a canteen breakfast, but how we can bring breakfast back on the table and not put it off for another budget. Because the way things are going, like families that are lower income, if that's the right word, it just came out at $1,600 extra that they have to put out just to buy groceries. Now, if we're going to look at our mental health and well-being of our students, this is a great way to actually help them to have better mental health, because they're struggling. We want to bring up our literacy rate. This is one of the ways that we can actually do it, by offering like on the table a real breakfast for all our students across the board. I think that's one thing that we really, really need to look at to be able to have safer schools.
Thank you.
So I'd
very-
like to know how we can put that out there.
Great. Thank you very much. Trustee Dixon, over to you, Trustee Lyra.
So my first piece is equity. Equity looks like a lot of things to me. It looks like supporting our low-income communities through the RAISE Index, through student achievement through equity, the SAKE program. It looks like making sure that our English program and our French program don't have huge discrepancies between them. It looks like making sure that all of our students have a fair chance to succeed, and applying whatever we need to make sure that that outcome is achieved. And so I think equity should be I'd like to see equity be a big part of our strategic plan as my first. On my second, I'd like the board to look at transformative and restorative justice practices as it relates to punishment, as it relates to suspensions and expulsions, and as it relates to transforming the school climate to be less punitive and more education. And the third thing I'd like to see in our strategic plan is a focus on the environment. I'd like to see us look at recycling and composting programs in all of our buildings. I liked that our last strategic plan had us look at heat pumps for schools. I'd like to look at us expanding that when it comes to energy efficiency in our buildings, when it comes to what we teach and what we model for our students. So in summary, the three things I'd like to see would be equity, sort of a relook at transformative justice, and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Over to you, Trustee Nash.
One of the things I've been amazed, my son is 29 years old, so I've long been not as well informed as I am today as to how our schools are doing and the fantastic programs. So, and it's tracking this progress, because there's been so many achievements, so many policies put forward, whether it be on gender equity, inclusiveness, and so forth. And for instance, mentioned the roadmap, Indigenous and roadmap and so forth. But it's measuring that progress, because these are still newly put forward. At least it's my impression. There's work to be done, and tracking that progress, is measuring it, is very important. A student achievement, again, is all encompassing, and probably brings in the points that Lyra just mentioned. And something I'm hearing from my constituents, and I allude to what Lynn Scott said, what we're already hearing is communication, and that's from all levels, be it staff, student, and parent level. It's a very important aspect.
Thank you very much, Trustee Nash. Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. My priorities are in no particular order, but certainly our special needs students. I think they've certainly suffered over the last several years and are feeling quite challenged. And I'd like to really spend a lot of time supporting those students and getting them back on track, feeling heard, feeling needed, or feeling that their well-being is addressed, which leads to my second, student well-being overall. I'm certainly hearing a lot of stories of increased bullying in our schools, so I'd like us to address our policies on bullying. And also I'd like to, and my third priority, as Trustee Blackburn mentioned, are staff morale. I'm certainly hearing, just in my own zone, teachers who have been longtime educators that are, wanting to leave the profession, and their morale is low. So I think that definitely needs to be a priority. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Jenkins. Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you. So having a conversation now about our priorities before we've had the conversation with community is, I think, jumping the gun a little bit, but I'm certainly able to say that, you know, the reasons that I stepped forward to be a trustee was to advocate for addressing equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also safety for students as well as for staff. So that would be one point. Another point would be accountability of our programs, particularly as others have said, looking at whether or not we have equitable outcomes in different programs, such as early French immersion versus English programs, and real disparities in terms of who is sort of pushed into one program versus another, and looking at high attrition rates for boys in French immersion. Also, the third thing would be addressing special education. And this is something that I've heard most from my constituents about already in terms of supports for staff and students where there are special ed needs that aren't being met. And instead, these students are being pushed into alternative schools, which are not adequately supported in terms of special education and behavioral issues for children. So that's addressing those supports both for the staff as well as for the students. So those would be the three key areas that, you know, I said ahead of being here that I would advocate for, but I am really interested in having those conversations with students and with staff to determine what their priorities are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Trustee Milburn.
Thank you. And also building on what Trustee Kaplan-Murphy said, these would be what I personally want to see in our schools, but without the consultation with the community. I do want to emphasize these are what I personally want to see. So implementing the recommendations and improving literacy in schools would be one of the major areas I would want to focus on, and implementing the recommendations from the Right Trade report, but expanding upon that, creating a safe and inclusive school community for all students, educators, and parents in classrooms and outside of classrooms, and reporting back on what we heard from community members when we ask and engage with them. It's great to hear we are getting or working on getting an engagement platform online, but building on that and making sure we're promoting it.
Thank you. Trustee Scott.
Thank you. A number of things that I was thinking about have already been mentioned, but I think looking at the higher level of where we're going with a strategic plan, one of the things that would be worth doing would be having a really good look at roles, responsibilities, and relationships, because let's face it, education is people-centric, and we have sometimes duplication of effort in different roles. We don't always understand what the next person, the next group is supposed to be doing or is doing, and how that fits with what we are doing. And I think that it would be helpful to move all of our other priorities forward if we actually had that better understanding of responsibilities, roles, and relationships. The second thing that I think is equally important is the communications piece, because we need to be able to communicate in ways that people actually understand. And that means at the right level to the right audience, and using the right kind of language to encourage those authentic conversations, which need to be part of what we are doing every day, is having those authentic conversations in classrooms and across the system. So those really are two things, but I think they're big enough to count for three.
Thank you very much. Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So rather than going to three, I'll just outline one large one, just from the time that we've had to think about it. And for me, that really is to do with student academic achievement, especially in the areas of our technical subjects. Factually, we've seen from the EQAO scores that our students are not having as much difficulty in the reading and writing areas, but math continues to be an issue. Anecdotally, I've heard from parents who have said that they've had to spend significant amounts of time at home and tutoring services to support math and science areas. And as a lecturer at our universities in engineering, I have seen over the last 2 years the dichotomy of students who were coming out of the school system during the pandemic compared to those before it, and the significant drop off in some of those scientific and mathematical skills. So not sure how to structure that into a strategic plan quite yet, but that is one of the outcomes if we're looking at that area that I would like to see us working on.
Thank you. Over to you, student trustee Ho.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. First, I just want to thank the staff that have put today's presentation together and say that I know that many students will appreciate how this strategic plan centers around learning, more so than ever as a result of the pandemic. Many students, not just at our board, but across the province, have felt that they've fallen behind. And as Trustee Lee mentioned, even the students that do graduate and leave our schools feel that they aren't as prepared for post-secondary or other sort of after high school pathways. I will just echo many of the things that trustees have mentioned so far, like equity, student well-being, staff morale, and academic programming, as they are all crucial steps in the holistic process that I believe we need to take towards fostering student success and getting students back on track.
Wow, thank you very much. Over to you, Andrew Nordman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I sit and listen to our trustees talk about some very big ideas and some very important ideas, on behalf of Principal Gagne to my left and the 150 odd principals that we have in our district and vice principals, eventually we are going to be tasked with operationalizing the ideas that you're bringing forward tonight and through this process. So in the back of your mind, I would ask you to consider what it looks like on the ground floor for Ps and VPs, teachers, educational assistants, the staff that are going to be enacting some of these ideas that you are going to be talking about working through, because some of it is and can be very simple and straightforward, and some of it cannot. And so think about those processes for us when you are having these conversations. It's very important. Okay, and rely on the staff, the senior staff, and principals in the school and the representatives here to help you through that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Seema Lamba.
Yeah, so it's actually just continuing on and building on the equity roadmap.
Seema, can you just double check that you're on?
I'm on.
Okay.
Okay. No, I'm on. Yeah, I'm on. Yeah. So building on the equity roadmap, right? Like there's always a fear that if you start something, it could end, but really to build on it and keep moving forward. And some of the things within that are things like being better to be able to address and eliminate when racism occurs. I mean, even in the last 6 months, I think I've heard of 3 incidences that were not really dealt with in a way that, you know, could have been dealt with. So that's still happening. So to really focus on how do we still address when those incidences happen in the schools, you know, whether it's racism, sexism, or homophobia or transphobia and so on. But also to see the school board and school curriculum reflective of their communities. We're not there yet, right? But to continue on that journey, and that can be from school staff to teachers to principals to senior management, you know, including superintendents and so on, because, you know, that would give the students the sense of belonging as well if they see themselves reflected in their teachers at school, and that's not there yet. And also because there's been a lot of work done on equity and diversity inclusion, the measurements, right? What are the measurements? I mean, there was a policy on sort of the police policy. I don't know what exactly it's called, Safe Schools, I think, right? And there's a measurement in there about how many times police are called, right? So we would, getting that reporting back and those statistics and just clear measurements of success and where the success isn't happening, like around graduations and discipline. And that's, some of that is being collected. And then over the last couple of years, more of that data has been asked to be collected and, and to keep moving forward to continue to do that, right? So that's, I think, the overall one is really to keep the focus on building on the equity roadmap. Another one, a side one, would be how did you have better relationships so that there's meaningful consultations, not only with like the community partners I hear, but with committees, right? That's maybe an ACE thing, but I'd like to see how can that be built better, because sometimes committee members feel like it's a checkbox when, when presentations are made. So how can that be more meaningful so that you do get that equity input and aspects into the work?
Next on our list, we have Suzanne Lyon.
Thank you. I'm just going to start my video. Thank you, and through you, Chair. There are three things that I would like to mention, and I am in agreement with many of the trustees and previous speakers, and I would like to just pick up on what Seema was saying a little bit. So my first comment is that, of course, I think there should be a focus on student well-being and, in fact, family well-being. You cannot have student well-being, I think, without looking at the families and communities as a whole. So having a more holistic approach, I think, to well-being is essential. And frankly, it's a triad. So the well-being of educators and employees in our schools is enormously important as well. And they've come through a terrible couple of years, and we all know what's been going on with teachers. So well-being in general in a holistic kind of approach. Special education. Others have noted that kids with spec ed needs have fallen behind. Everybody's fallen behind, but spec ed needs kids in particular. IEPs and spec ed programs have never been as well resourced as they could have, and some would argue should have been. So I'd like to see an increased focus on that in the strategic plan moving forward. And finally, the third point for me would be writ large, I guess, inclusion, but for me that includes anti-racism. It includes looking at the calls to action from the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry and how the board has implemented those or not implemented those, making sure that our curricula reflects Indigenous history and reconciliation, and just in general, because there has been an incredible increase in hate crimes reported recently. I'm thinking about anti-Semitic types of things. I would like to see a conscious effort towards encouraging civility and rational debate and lowering the level of vitriol in our schools and in our society, I guess, writ large, but in our schools, which is really all we can address right now. But just, I'd like to see that underpin everything we do, that we foster a climate of civility and respectful exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne Lyon. Before I move on to the second time speakers, I'm going to pass over the floor to Chair Lyra so I can say a few words.
Go for it.
Great. So I'm not going to repeat everything that has been said, but I will reframe it in a couple of words that I continue to hear. The first of which is empowerment. The second is accountability. And then with those two words, I want us to have an emphasis on relationships. And there's so much more that I can and want to say, and so much more that I want to listen to the community on how we can do that. So I'm just going to end it on those few words. Actually, I'm not going to end it.
Back to you.
Thanks. Trustee Lyra, back to you.
I thought there was other second-time speakers. So sort of three things I'm hoping people will consider when we start discussing our strategic plan. One of them is, I think that a universal bus pass is an equity measure. I think that making sure that every student has the opportunity to participate in extracurriculars after school because their parents can drive them or they can't, or they can participate in band before school, is really important to make sure that all of our students get the fullest out of our schools. I'd like to see the district consider open source software as opposed to software as a service. I know that we as a district use a number of software as a service companies, and I'd like to see us do what some cities around the world have done and start looking at open source alternatives to spending piles of money. And I'd like to have us look at broadly system accountability. I think that we do a bunch of good things, but we are not as accountable as we could be to the public, to our constituents, and to our funders. And so I'd like to have us look at system accountability and what that means when we start to discuss our strategic plan.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other hands, it's time to move on to a very important part of our meeting tonight. I just want to let everybody know that we had 20 minutes allotted to the last, and we've obviously gone far beyond that, appropriately so, because it was a very, very helpful conversation. The next one we also have 20 minutes, but yeah, I'm hearing that those numbers don't, that time doesn't matter. So important report 22-077, analysis of the district's 2021-2022 financial reports. Over to you, Director Williams-Taylor, to introduce the report.
Thank you. And as we settle into the second report, just huge thanks to Executive Officer Giroux and Andrew Rahim for a very robust presentation and assurances that much of the feedback that we've been provided will be captured and inform the next steps. So thank you for sharing that. So we do have before us the report that is presenting our financial results. Please note it is from the 21-22 school year, which is the school year that has been completed. And so this closes this loop before we get started in the 22-23 budget season. So this kind of closes that piece off for us. We do have with us Manager Terry Adamwaite, who is going to do the presentation. You also have, trustees, the written presentation printed for you and present for you. Manager Adamwaite is presenting in the absence of Associate Director Giroux, who is not here today, but who is the key contact on the report. So I will pass it over to you, Manager Adamwaite.
Can you hear me? Thank you. So today I'm going to be giving you a review of the consolidated financial statements as well as the statements that we provide the ministry. These were reviewed by KPMG and approved last week and remitted to the ministry as well. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. Sorry, so I'll just give a brief overview of the financial statements that the consolidated financial statements that were reviewed by KPMG. OCDSB's consolidated financial statements have multiple people or multiple issues in there, sorry. The OCDSB also contains the OSTA, the Transportation Consortium, the OCNet, which is our international schools, and it also includes our school-generated funds, which includes school council funds as well. They present information about financial assets and liabilities in addition to revenues and expenses. Next slide, please. So these are the financial statements. The consolidated financial statements has us in a surplus position, but it must be noted that that surplus position is mainly due to revenue recognition of land purchases over the 21-22 school year. And so those funds are not available to the school district. They have already been spent. And the overall surplus was deemed to be $11.6 million. Next slide, please. But if you look at our comparative summary of accumulated surplus, this is the amount of money left as a reserve and other compliance funds available or not available to us. You'll notice that the largest amount is land acquisitions. Land acquisitions is about 80% of our comparative summary accumulated surplus. And those are funds that are not available to us as they were used to purchase lands for future or current capital sites. The amount that we have available to us as district compliance, meaning funds that are available for decision-making, is at the top. You can see that we have reduced that line item by about $15.6 million. It should be noted in that $29.7 million available, there is about $12 million earmarked for internal capital projects. So those funds are not available for use at this point in time. As well, we have money in reserve belonging to OCNet, as well as school general funds, school generated funds that are for school council and school funds collected at the school level. Excuse me, next slide, please. So then we move to the ministry financial statements that we remit to the ministry every year. And you'll see that we had originally been approved for a $14.9 million deficit. This was a planned deficit that was approved by the trustees last year. You can see that the actual came in at about $15.6 million. So we were very close to the budgeted amount. We were within about $700,000, which is, given the circumstances, quite a good outcome. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a comparative overview of the accumulated surplus. So again, the accumulated surplus is monies that year over year, we may have small surpluses at the end of the year, and those are collected and used as deemed appropriate. And so you can see, starting in the 16-17 school year, we were building our surplus as suggested by the ministry. They suggest we have, I believe, a 2% surplus available for emergency needs. And we can see that surplus growing until about 1920. And that was when COVID hit. And so we had a smaller deficit than that we had anticipated, but nonetheless a deficit. 2021, we saw a surplus of about $5.7 million, and that was due to schools being closed and supplies and such not being used to the extent that we had seen in prior years. Finally, in this school year, 21-22, we did see the planned deficit plus a slight bit larger than that did accumulate to a $15.6 million deficit, to remaining accumulated surplus at year end available for compliance, which is $29.8 million. As I mentioned, 12 million of that is earmarked for internal capital projects, mostly portables, and other capital related projects. It should also be noted that although I am discussing 21-22 financial statements, we should be aware that in 22-23 we are projected to have another deficit of about $9 million. So that will again decrease the accumulated surplus available for decision-making for the 23-24 school year. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to go over some significant items that happened over the 21-22 school year. The average daily enrollment, or ADE, we did see an increase over 2021 of about 389 average daily enrolled students. The elementary ADE increased by about 746, while we did see a decrease over estimates, over the prior year of 357. We continue to see growth in the Indigenous Education Allocation Program. It continues to grow as the grade 11 requirements require the English program that includes Indigenous curriculum is a requirement. And so we do see a large intake of students year over year. The amount allocated for 21-22 is approximately $7.2 million, but those funds are earmarked specifically for Indigenous-based programs. And so if those funds are not fully used in the current year, they can be rolled over, but are specified for Indigenous programs. So we did see a decrease in transportation contract costs in the 21-22 school year, but there was also an offsetting increase in fuel costs. It was significant, but those fuel charges were covered by the ministry using a fuel escalator allowance in the amount of $3 million. Next slide, please. So another cost pressure in the 21-22 school year, multiple capital projects are behind schedule, and many capital projects are being pushed faster than had anticipated due to growth in certain suburban areas. So we are experiencing labor shortages and supply chain issues requiring us to relocate portables. And so those costs were significantly over budget. We budgeted $2 million for the 21-22 school year, and we saw an overage of about $2.4 million over budget. In 21-22, there was a significant increase in PPF grants. PPF grants are special monies provided by the ministry for special purposes. We did see a large increase of about $10.8 million, which more than doubled our PPF grants. Those increases were due mostly to COVID funding, and those grants are no longer available to us going forward. We continue to see cost pressures in the extended day and childcare programs due to experienced losses due to COVID in the 21-22 school year. Those losses were substantially offset using PPF funding from the ministry. I know we're dealing with 21-22 school year results, but I did review the current extended day and childcare programs in the 22-23 school year, and we are seeing a significant rebound in participation and in municipal funding available to us. So we suspect that those losses will not continue into this current school year. Next slide, please. Teacher replacement costs exceeded our budget by about $17.1 million. We do see increased absences across the board, not just in teacher replacements. The issue is teacher and EAs must be replaced in the classroom, so we do have additional costs. And that budget and the budget was exceeded by about $17.1 million. Part of these increases can be attributed to the PPF grants, and so those absences were subsidized. The district continues to closely monitor absences and to promote a healthy workplace that fosters employee well-being. We also we experience some GSN funding loss for international students, which is then borne to the OCNet program. And that was about $1.8 million that we received in recovery costs from OCNet. Next slide, please. So again, the operating deficit for the 21-22 school year was approximately $15.6 million, which should be noted was only about $700,000 more than the projected deficit, so well within expectations. The 22-23 budget is projected to have a $9.1 million deficit, which will be supported by our accumulated surplus. The reduced accumulated surplus means that there is less flexibility in supporting future budgets that have a planned deficit. So we will advise for fiscal prudence to ensure the 23-24 budget is balanced. And that concludes my PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have one speaker on the list. And that will be Trustee Lyra. Would you like to start?
Thank you. I'd like to open by thanking you for the presentation. I found it very informative. My biggest concern was the teacher replacement costs exceeding expectations by $17 million. Is that projected to continue into this year? Are we expecting to exceed our projections for the 2022-2023 school year?
Through you, Chair. We are continuing to see replacement costs trending closely to last year's. So I expect that, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. Are we looking for future budgets to ensure that we have reevaluated how often staff are expected to be out so that we're not off by so much in future budgets?
We are in finance looking at better ways to determine the cost per employee and so that we can more accurately predict the budgetary requirements of absenteeism.
Okay. Last question. As a percentage of the teacher replacement budget, how much was $17.1 million? Is it 2%? Is it 50%? Is it 150%?
Of the entire overall budget or the budget for replacement costs?
The budget for replacement costs.
The budget for replacement cost was about $20 million.
So it's 100% more than we were expecting to spend, or 80% more?
It was significantly higher, yes.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Aziz.
Sorry, I'd like to point out that my colleagues, Trustee Scott mentioned that. Thank you, she's the best desk buddy. In the report Annex B or Appendix B, the percentage Trustee Evans was looking for, and that
yes,
Terry is mentioning is, I believe, it's at 91.7%, which you can find. You pointed at it, Lynn, and I'm looking for it now.
Through you, Chair. It's Appendix B. There's Appendix A through D at the end of the report. So Appendix B will give you a breakdown of percentage differences by category.
Teamwork. Thank you all. My question is about the last point in the summary about fiscal prudence for the 2023-2024 budget, excuse me. How can the board work together to keep this in mind, especially with the point that Trustee Evans, Chair Evans made about teacher replacement costs and other concerns going forward?
Through you, Chair. Well, we have to remember it is $1 billion budget. That's seemingly a lot of money, but we are bound by contractual agreements, ministry agreements. There are programs, such as I mentioned, the Indigenous program, where those funds cannot be used for any other purpose than Indigenous related programs. And we have several other programs similar to that. So we have to look, we have to honor those agreements before we can look at where there are opportunities to save. Currently, we are looking at finding efficiencies within the district, using current assets, leveraging what we have, finding automation and other cost savings opportunities in order to find those things that will not affect the classroom. Once we find all of those savings, then we will have to look at other opportunities. There are opportunities to find savings in perhaps supplies. There are opportunities in perhaps external contract agreements, not school agreements with teachers, but perhaps outside school contracts that we have. And that's just the beginning. But fundamentally, what would have to happen is we would have to pull any opportunities and discuss those opportunities and come to an agreement on how we want to move forward with those savings.
Thank you. No further questions.
Trustee Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to Appendix B to the report, when you look at the column showing the variances for the current year, certainly the occasional teachers replacement staff line stands out as the biggest dollar amount of variance at $17.1 million and a very high percentage of change from budget. The next biggest amount is the $6 million in salaries and benefits, but that's less than 1% of a change. Ms. Adams-Waite has already spoken about the temporary pupil accommodation piece, which was a change of $2.3 million. That was a whopping 119% over what had been expected. And again, we have a good explanation for that. The one I'm not clear on, though, is in the first section under instruction, fees, contractual, and rentals, where there is a $4 million variance, which appears to be shown as 49.5% of a change from what was expected. And I just wondered if we could have an explanation of that one, please.
Through you, Chair. We received a PPF, specifically, I believe there's related to tutoring, and that is fundamentally outside contracts. So it was, although it's over budget, it's using PPF funds. So it's not a matter of concern at this time.
Thank you very much for that. And through you, Madam Chair, I would like to request that we have some kind of an update at a future meeting, and I hope not too far in the future, on how we are managing the whole expectation around providing tutoring opportunities for students, because I haven't seen a lot of information on that yet. And certainly it is a matter that should be of interest to our communities.
Noted, Trustee Scott, and thank you for raising that. Next, I have Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to either the director or manager. I can never say your name, Jerry. Sorry. During the audit committee, it was discussed regarding the occasional teacher line item that some of that was attributed to a change or a accounting practice with regards to the sick leave provisions or contractual provisions. If you wouldn't mind explaining that to the rest of the board of trustees.
Through you, Chair. Yes. So. We reviewed some practices that were happening year over year, and we reviewed them for accuracy and to determine if they were still valid practices. And one of the ways that this was costed was outdated due to the change in practices that happened in 2012 related to the sick time change. And so upon review, we changed the methodology that we used to ensure that we were more accurately reporting absent costs versus salary costs. But it should be noted that of that 17 million, that change was about $3 to $4 million. So it was not a significant, I mean, well, it's significant in the sense that it's $3 or $4 million, but doesn't represent the full amount that went over budget.
For sure, thank you. And for follow on, if under the full analysis report regarding this accumulated surplus, you did mention that about 12 million of it is restricted in the committed capital, but there are also other aspects of the accumulated surplus that is already internally appropriated. So if you wouldn't mind elaborating for my colleagues, the difference between the internally appropriate and the unappropriated line Specifically drawing to the attention that the unappropriated line is down to just under $2 million of unappropriated surplus.
Right, through you, Chair. So yeah, it's now sitting at $2 million, but there are other areas where we have allocated surplus funding. For instance, we have allocated $10 million to contingencies. Well, at the end of this current school year, that will be reduced significantly. So in that $29 million, $12 million of that is allocated towards capital projects. So that leaves us about $17 million. $10 million of that will be used up in the 22-23 school year. So you can see where we are beginning to enter into a period where we cannot be dependent on surplus to move forward when we prepare our budget for the following school year.
And that's all for me, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more hands, and so I'll take the opportunity as chair to read out the second guiding question that was brought forth in the report, just for everybody's attention. It says, what steps are being taken or will be taken in future decision-making and planning to mitigate adverse financial impacts and to leverage opportunities that were identified during the preparation of the analysis? That would be my question as well, and so hopefully I can take the opportunity to.
Sorry, Chair, can you repeat that, please?
The whole question. So this is the guiding question that's in the report. It's the second one. What steps are being taken and will be taken in future decision making and planning to mitigate adverse financial impacts and to leverage opportunities that were identified during the preparation of the analysis?
Through you, Chair. So currently, we are doing our revised, I'm assuming you mean in future periods. So, okay, so we're looking, like right now, we're looking at revised estimates. The ministry requires us to report about 3 to 4 months into the current year to ensure we're meeting at least the minimum standards that we reported initially. So right now, we're looking at efficiencies, leveraging what we already have, looking for interdepartmental strategies and partnerships to leverage so that maybe where 2 or 3 people within the school board is doing something, can we leverage that to one person? How do we leverage our data to provide information to differing departments, allowing us to spend more time to determine and analyze the information to find those savings. Our goal is to minimize the impact to the classroom, obviously. And so we're looking internally at the board office level initially to see where we can find those savings. But we may have to come to the table and discuss other opportunities at that point. But certainly our focus is to find opportunities within the organization that will not impact the classroom.
Thank you. And I see you, Trustee Kaplan Mark.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I have a question. Well, I have 2 questions. One has to do with the question that was just asked in terms of cost savings. What strategies are employed? You had listed as a significant item that the district continues to closely monitor absences and promote healthy workplace. So I ask respectfully, what is the board actually doing to promote a healthy workplace? That's number 1. And then my second question is also on cost savings. To what extent are you had mentioned automation and some other strategies, changing supply costs. I'm concerned that that would actually mean privatization, asking parents to take on the burden of supplying things that the board would have supplied in the past. And I'm concerned about the effect on teachers. I know I've had some designated designated occasional teachers have approached me and said that they are basically expected to do the same work as occasional teachers, but without any sick days, mental health days, or paid time off. And is that how we're going to be looking to balance our budget?
Through you, Chair.
Can I pass it over to Director Williams Taylor to begin?
Thank you, Chair. So these questions start to go into implementation and practice. I'll start with the wellness and the healthy workplace. Certainly, our superintendent of people culture and leadership is not at the table this evening. She would certainly speak to that actively, but a number of things that have happened. We have undertaken policy and procedure changes around disconnecting from the workplace. That is a recent procedure. We are undertaking how to implement flexibility for some employee groups, but we've also hired a wellness coordinator who has been actively working in schools and not only engaging in schools with employees, but then coming back to the senior staff around some of the findings with a goal to developing an employee wellness strategy. That is something that started late fall and is continuing into the new year. So that is a new undertaking to try to address some of the feedback that came out of the employee engagement survey that was undertaken earlier in the year last year. In terms of the notions around supplies and providing supplies to classrooms, certainly it is not the expectation or the undertaking of the district to divest itself of the responsibility around supplying classrooms with materials. That said, we also are thinking differently about how it is the materials are undertaken. So whereas we may have been spending lots of money on textbooks, for example, in the past, we have digital solutions that have helped us in a variety of different ways. So how are we maximizing, to use Ms. Adamwaite's comments, around maximizing the resources that we have to resource differently the way that we've undertaken. We do recognize, for example, paper costs are not the same as they have been in the past because we have found opportunities around digital solutions. When we think about staff development, for example, that is another area where we think about how it is that we can leverage staff development differently so that we are not putting further pressure on the system around teacher and educator replacement, and looking at how it is that we can engage in learning in ways that maximizes and builds on some opportunities that we are learning about. So those are some examples there. I think Ms. Adamwaite has made it clear that the goals around addressing our budget pressures are not intended to land at the desks of students, but in fact, we need to continue to enhance the experience that students have. And the desks of students need to continue to be properly resourced and looking at ways that we undertake different kinds of work. I know in a previous conversation this evening, managing expectations was one item that was raised. And as trustees go into the budget process that begins in January, there is a propensity to want to do everything for everybody all the time, everywhere. We will need to think very differently about how we do that because we are in fact resourced in a certain and particular way. And we need to think about where it is that we will put our financial, human, and time resources as we think about what is the priority and what is a high yield outcome over what is an opportunity that may be a wonderful thing to do, but not reasonable when we consider the cost to the district in terms of time, human, and money resources.
Thank you. I'm not sure that the question was answered, which was how would we address the deficit due to absences by promoting a more healthy workplace? I don't think that that is answered by saying that that we would have employee wellness strategies, because the absences, some of them are because of mental health, but many of them are because the staff are sick, and there's that issue. So then the other issue is the designated occasional teachers. I understand that that's something that's unique to or particularly used by Ottawa, not maybe by other school boards, but how much, where in the budget does that fall, and how much are we employing these designated occasional teachers as opposed to other occasional teachers who have benefits?
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Myrth. Over to you, Education Director.
Thank you. I will go back to the question about promoting a healthy workplace, because I will say to you that there is consideration around mental health, well-being, and the contribution of mental health, well-being, stress to educators, and why it is educators are absent from the classroom or from schools. And so while it is that it is not the full solution to the problem, it certainly does contribute to the problem. And so every opportunity to address those kinds of concerns. We've heard teacher morale being spoken about multiple times today. So I will return to that question and answer to indicate that that is an effort that has been undertaken, and it is an area where we can do work. And the other piece, when it comes to the designated occasional teachers, the designated occasional teachers is used in 1 or 2 other districts. I know a number of districts have approached us about how it is that that has been undertaken. It is an undertaking that is done in partnership with the unions. And there is clear stipulation about how it is that it can be undertaken, because it is not an opportunity that is intended to undermine or compromise the access to work that occasional teachers have. So there's a very clear protocol about how it is that designated occasional teachers are undertaken. And that protocol was developed in concert with our union partners in terms of how it is that that was delivered. And in fact, it has offered opportunities for designated occasional teachers to become occasional teachers. And in fact, there are times that we have had difficulty keeping up with maintaining the designated occasional teacher roster, because many of them are in fact shifting into an occasional teacher role because they have gained the experience, gained the opportunity, and therefore are able to meet the criteria for occasional teaching, and in some cases move on into permanent contracts.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Moving on to my second time speaker list, Trustee Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And question for the staff. I know that the public generally doesn't like to hear public institutions budgeting for a surplus, but given the fact that we have depleted our retained surplus and we are expected to eat into that further this school year, in budgeting for the 23-24 school year and beyond, what provisions are we looking at in order to do some saving for the rainy day and have budgeted surplus to support any future instances where we might choose to strategically go into and use up the surplus, such as should another pandemic type situation occur?
I'm gonna actually turn the question first to the director.
I will turn to Manager Adam Waite for this question.
Oh, through you, Chair. The ministry does strongly recommend that we maintain a certain surplus. I believe it's 2%, but I'll have to check on that if you want specific information. So going forward, absolutely, it should be a consideration to rebuild the surplus. If there were to be another incident such as the pandemic, with what we have now, we would certainly be limited in our options.
Thank you. Over to you, Trustee Lyra.
You mentioned that there was a contingency fund that we put into the budget every year. It's my understanding that any money that doesn't get spent out of that contingency fund goes to the surplus. So if we contingency $10 million and we only have $2 million of contingency, that is $8 million that goes into the surplus. Is my understanding correct?
Through you, Chair. So there is an amount of money that is available for compliance. And we put $10 million in for contingency plans. That is for unexpected events that may happen during the current year or in future years. But for example, we are expected to have a $9 million deficit this year. So that would basically eat into that contingency fund.
But last year we put $10 million into the contingency fund, and next year if we put $10 million into the contingency fund and we don't spend out of it, then it goes into the surplus.
Through you, Chair, we would have to have $10 million to put back into the contingency fund.
Got it.
I'm not seeing any more questions on this. So I would like to thank you for your presentation and your skillful way of answering all of those questions in rapid fire. Thank you so much. And now we are going to move on to report from OPSPA. I'm going to turn to Trustee Jenkins or Trustee Scott. Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Trustee Scott and myself joined other trustees from across Ontario to participate in Advocacy Day at Queen's Park on November 28th. We met with several MPPs, including MPP Lucille Collard, MPP Joel Hardin, MPP Jandra Pasma, and MPP John Yakubowski. So we had to go all the way to Toronto just to meet with many of our local Ottawa MPPs. But we certainly shared with the MPs the priorities from OPSPA, which included capitals and facilities, equity, diversity and inclusion, and student transportation. And I've shared with trustees the OPSPA recommendations, and if anyone has any questions, please share them with other trustee Scott or myself.
Thank you very much, Trustee Jenkins. Does anyone have any rapid fire questions on that? Oh, Trustee Scott.
I have a tiny bit just to add to that. I have not had an opportunity to prepare a written report on the actual Board of Directors meetings, but in terms of the meetings with the MPPs, certainly I think that the trustees' presentations were well received by our local MPPs, and student trustee Anton Howe was also part of those representations to the MPPs during that day of advocacy at Queen's Park. In terms of the Board of Directors meeting that preceded, the one thing I would like to highlight is that some trustees may recall that the OCDSB sent a policy resolution to OPSPA asking about roles and responsibilities of school districts and with respect to looking after the health and safety of students and staff. Last year, the Ontario Public School Boards Association approved that policy resolution and commissioned a study which was presented and discussed at the Board of Directors meeting. I expect there will be some further discussions because basically it looked at the ground floor of this is what is in the legislation, past arbitrations and practice and so on. But I think there are also deeper questions and forward-looking questions that trustees from across the province would like to raise in that respect. And we will be dealing with that in a future Board of Directors meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Aziz.
I'll start by thanking Trustee Jenkins and Trustee Scott for preparing this report, and Trustee Howe for representing the OCDSB all the way in Toronto. The report notes are super helpful, and the question I was going to ask was answered by the notes and further discussion. So thank you both anyway.
Okay, so on to agenda item 10.2, new ministry initiatives updates. Are there any new ministry initiatives?
No, through you, Chair, there are none.
Okay, great. Next, I will turn to Trustee Lee to provide an OSTA update if it in fact is required.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The update is just that OSTA held its AGM this past Monday, in which Trustee Joanne McEwen from the Ottawa Catholic School Board was appointed as the president of OSTA, and myself was appointed as the vice president of OSTA.
Congratulations, Trustee Vice Chair Lee. We'll call out for any other new business. See no new business, I now declare this meeting adjourned. No? Okay. Bye, everyone.